Saul Bass is one of the greatest designers of all time and has inspired me in so many ways. From his timeless minimal logo designs to his iconic movie posters and title sequences. Saul Bass was a designer in a time way before social media and definitely before you had to build an online presence for yourself. But what would it look like if Saul Bass lived in today's world? So in this video, I wanted to honor the GOAT of graphic design by chatting a little bit about him and seeing what it would look like to build an online portfolio for Saul Bass himself. Let's get into it. So I started this process with the help of Framer, and shout out to them for sponsoring this video idea. I'm a designer and I don't really know how to code for shit. So I began by looking through a lot of their amazing templates they had and really tried to find one that would work well for Saul Bass's work. If you're unfamiliar with Saul Bass, he's mainly known for three things. Timeless, minimal corporate logo designs like ones for Bell, Warner, Quaker, and Kleenex. Iconic movie posters that I'm sure you've seen, like his work for Vertigo, Exodus, and The Man with the Golden Arm. And then of course, his legendary title sequences, like the ones he did for Ocean's 11, Casino, and Psycho. With that being said, I needed a portfolio that would act more almost like an art gallery or someone who would, design more in a time that was print or video based. I know a lot of work went into his projects, but this is more a site that I wanted to be like a tribute and kind of a modern art / designer portfolio. So after digging around the Framer website for a while, I found this template that was actually for photographers that I thought would work perfect in displaying his work in this kind of gallery environment. Once that was locked in, I spent a lot of time researching Saul Bass and finding out which work I wanted to include in the portfolio. He has so much legendary work, but I had to narrow it down. I did a bunch of research online, mainly through a bunch of different online sources, this film poster gallery, and this Saul Bass archive website. And in addition to that, a really valuable resource for this project was this book I bought, Saul Bass, A Life of Film and Design. This had way more in it than I could ever need for this project, and it was a great resource. What was really cool about this book is it allowed me to familiarize myself even more with Saul Bass's work, but also learn a bunch of new stuff that I had no idea about. I obviously knew he was known for his iconic movie posters, but he also did a bunch of other sick posters too, like these ones for the San Francisco Film Festival or this Human Rights Week poster. He was honestly just a legend, and I loved how he was able to break down all the elements to such a minimal way, but still get the point across without it being boring or, overly simplified. In that book, I learned a lot more than I already knew about Saul Bass, yes. But I also learned the importance of his working partner and wife, Elaine Bass, who made huge contributions to some of his most famous design work and even directed and produced the famous Spartacus title sequence. So once I kind of narrowed it down, I realized I wanted to break this into three sections: the title sequences, logos, and posters. And I started with the logo designs. I gathered all the logo designs that I wanted to include in the website and resized them in Photoshop so they would all have a good amount of negative space and just kind of be a similar size to all flow in this type of grid. And Saul Bass designed some of the most iconic logos of all time. I definitely want to do them justice with how they were presented. What I really respect about Saul Bass is he worked on these giant corporate brand identities and developed these iconic logos, and not only did he kill it on those, but he used those giant projects to build up that portfolio and gain a bunch of money for his agency and studio, and use that to fund more of his passion projects like directing and producing his own movies, as well as designing these more avant-garde movie posters. The whole one for them, one for you thing. I feel like he really embodied that. I also had no idea he designed the Wiener Schnitzel logo, but it makes sense because it's fire. So now that I had all the posters and logos gathered, I started figuring out some of the actual design styling for the website. I spent a decent amount of time researching fonts and trying to figure out how I can really make this website feel kind of Saul Bass inspired. I knew I wanted to use the letter forms from that kind of cutout stylistic aesthetic that Saul Bass used in posters like The Shining and The Cardinal, but I also wanted to find a font that was reminiscent or similar to a lot of the body copy that he used in these posters. And the closest thing I found was Franklin Gothic Extra Condensed. And then for some of the other various thinner body copy, I used News Gothic. Those two fonts also were used a lot in the Blue Note catalog. And after doing a lot of stylistic research on that whole era, I saw a lot of crossover between the jazzier style Saul Bass posters and the jazz Blue Note album covers that were coming out at the similar time. The actual cutout style font that I found was called Comrade, and I used that for this giant navigation system and made the hover effect transition into the condensed version just to give it a little something extra. So I started with a lot of the easier stuff here, like plugging in the different fonts, changing the information, working on the about page, and even adding the images of Saul Bass himself. I decided to keep the white background. I really wanted to do a darker mode or even a cream to kind of ode to that style that he worked in a lot, but I just felt like the logos especially would best be displayed on white with a lot of negative space around them. So I had to kind of make that compromise there. Once most of the simple branding was pretty much locked in, there wasn't much else to do besides starting to plug in the work. I was lucky that this template actually worked out almost perfectly that Framer had, so shout out to them. And I used their CMS system, which allows you to easily plug in different work and just switch it out like on a almost spreadsheet type like UI thing, and then all the work just populates on the page. I started by adding the logos and made sure they were displayed with the name of the company and the year they were designed, especially because a lot of these are just symbols. And I displayed them in a 2 to 3 column grid depending on what device you're viewing it on. And it all became very responsive. Like when you narrowed it down to mobile, it was just a 1 column grid. And when you got it really wide on a larger desktop, you can view it in a 3 column. Also implemented a feature where when you click into any of these logos, you can view them closer in this like slideshow type of view if you really want to take a nicer look at them. After adding all these logos to the website, I think I narrowed down my favorites to this Ajinomoto one, United Way, Wiener Schnitzel, and of course the classic Bell logo. I noticed a big trend too during this middle section of Saul Bass's career where he was making a lot of these circle shaped logos with a lot of motions and lines through them. They all feel very similar but have their little distinct traits. Overall though, all these logos are so good, and it's really a testament to Saul Bass's design chops that a lot of these giant corporations are still using these logos today, or at least some variation of them that has changed over time. Once all the logos were locked in, I pretty much just had to do the same for the posters. I did some preparation also for the posters in Photoshop by making sure all the margins were very similar and they were sized up to almost be all the same. I was able to use this masonry grid layout thing in Framer that worked out perfectly by allowing them to all flow in this like almost Instagram-esque type grid, and it didn't really matter that they were the exact same size because it allowed for a little bit of variation in between each of them. Seeing all of his posters laid out like this really put emphasis on what a unique and specific style Saul Bass had. His use of color and type felt so unique, but all the posters also have this through line through them that really makes them feel like part of his own design language, you know? I love his posters because he breaks down the movie into his most minimal elements, but it can still convey what the movie's about without spoiling it or using any actor's photos or anything like that, which is so common nowadays. So now that I got those 2 sections pretty much set up, I realized that this style probably wasn't gonna work for the title sequences because I wanted them to be playing as a video and take up the full horizontal width of the page. So I had to figure out a new layout for that. If you're new to Saul Bass, he's basically the godfather of movie title sequences. Before him, the movie title would just pop up boring for a couple seconds before the movie. But he revolutionized how this was done and how people saw movies with beginning and end credits by adding moving elements and dynamic typography. And I think overall just changed kind of the culture of how movies are produced. I mean, every movie pretty much has an opening title sequence now, and I think that he pretty much paved the way for that. And I did not know he was working up until this late, but he actually did the one for Casino in 1995, I believe. And I guess Martin Scorsese, he actually had a foreword in this book. When he hired him, he was like, can we even hire him? He's the GOAT. Like, I don't know if we should approach him. So it's really cool to see not only a graphic designer getting that level of respect and admiration, but from someone like such a legendary director as Martin Scorsese. So for the title sequence layout, I basically just wanted them to be in a 1 column grid and autoplay. And gathering all these ended up being a little bit of a hassle because I had to source them all online and then cut the front and the end of them so they wouldn't have all the other producer credits and stuff, and like MGM, the lion, and this and that. I wanted to play and get directly into the art. And I also had to resize them to be small enough to be displayed on web. But luckily, a lot of these are old movies, so the resolution wasn't that high to begin with. After I got all that sorted though, it was pretty much as simple as just dropping them in and adding a little frame margin thing in between each one to give it some negative space. I wanted to autoplay too, so they were all going as you got onto the page. So the compromise I had to make there was there is no audio on these, and I think the audio is really important. So I do suggest checking out these title sequences on YouTube or whatever. My favorites for sure though definitely have to be this one for Ocean's 11, and then also this animated one for It's a Mad Mad World. So definitely go check out the full ones of those. So yeah, the website was pretty much done at this point. I just had to do a couple other things for like the settings on the back end, but I didn't want to go through all that because it's kind of boring. So with that being said, here's a little final review. So here's the final website. So we got the photo of the legend himself right here, the type I was talking about, that Franklin Gothic, and then here is our different project sections. And you can see when you hover over it, it goes into the condensed version of this typeface. Little about page with a nice photo right there. This is kind of like if this was a modern portfolio, you know, he'd have what he worked on and kind of his selective clients and whatnot. Here's the posters page. So see, my screen's so wide that it actually lays it out on a 4-column grid. You can see a lot of the through line in his different styles, a lot of uses of reds and orange. It's just so sick that he was making dope posters like this in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Like this Schindler's List one just goes crazy. Everyone's probably seen that Shining or the Vertigo poster. And this is actually a film that Saul Bass made himself, the Solar film. So we can go to the logos page here also. This is why I wanted this to be on white. I feel like this gets displayed really well at this size and this way. And I didn't show it on the posters. Let me go back real quick. But yeah, you can click into these, right? And then just use your keyboard to scroll through all the different posters. Same goes for the logos. You can click into these, boom, 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 you know, scroll through them all. After looking at some of this stuff too, I'm curious for you to let me know in the comments which poster was your favorite that Saul Bass has done. Which logo do you really like? That Jomo one is just fire, and I didn't even know he did the Lowry's one either. That was one of his first logos. But yeah, I'd be curious to know which stuff you're liking. And then the last thing we have is the titles page. So once you click on here, these all auto populate, and it's just the MP4s just ready to go. There's no sound. We have Vertigo, Man with the Golden Arm, Anatomy of a Murder. This one's really cool, North by Northwest. It has all this cool dynamic typography. Ocean's 11, this one's super sick. Obviously Las Vegas inspired. And this Exodus one I really liked as well. But these all turned out really good, and this is just a simple layout. But yeah, definitely go check these out. And I'm pretty stoked on how the portfolio turned out. And shout out to Saul Bass. Thank you so much for watching, and a huge shout out to Framer for sponsoring this one. If you want to check them out and build a portfolio for yourself, the link is in the description. Lastly, one more big shout out to Saul Bass. Thank you for paving the way for a bunch of graphic designers like me. You'll truly be missed. Rest in peace. Much love, and I'll catch you in the next one.